It started like any other evening. The sun was dipping low over Houston, painting the sky in that hazy mix of amber and burnt orange. I just left the office, another long day of meetings that bled into emails, that bled into more meetings. I wasn't in a rush, just tired, ready to get home, peel off the suit, and breathe. I had the AC humming, windows up, and the radio low. Some old R&B track I probably hadn't heard in years was playing, and it was doing a decent job softening the edge of rush hour traffic. I was coming up on an intersection when the light turned yellow. I slowed down, figured I had plenty of time to stop, and I did. I came to a smooth, complete stop just as it flipped red. Then I saw the flashing lights in my rearview. Red and blue, followed by that sharp, unmistakable chirp of a siren. I furrowed my brow, confused more than anything. I hadn't done anything wrong. I pulled over, calm, rolled down the window like I'd done a dozen times before. Behind me, the cruiser came to a stop. The door opened. Out stepped the officer. Mid-30s, buzz cut, square jaw. He walked like someone who always thought he was in control. His badge caught the last bit of sunlight as he approached my window. "License and registration," he said flatly. No hello, no explanation. I didn't argue. Just nodded and reached for the glove box, slow, careful movements. No sudden gestures. I knew how this worked. Handed everything over without saying a word. I could feel him looking me over while I moved. Not scanning. Scrutinizing. "You know why I pulled you over?" he asked, leaning just slightly into my space. I kept my tone even. "I'm not entirely sure, officer." "You didn't come to a full stop at the light," he replied. But there was a hesitation in his voice. Like he knew that was shaky ground. I frowned slightly. I thought I stopped in time. But all right. He didn't move. Didn't go back to his car. Just stood there, staring at me for a second too long. His posture changed. Like something clicked in his head. Like he'd decided this wasn't just a traffic stop anymore. He looked down at my license again. "You from around here?" he asked. "I moved here a few months ago," I said. The address on the license is current. But I could tell he wasn't really interested in my answer. His tone was shifting, turning from procedural to personal. The way his eyes narrowed. The way he leaned in closer. "Where were you headed in such a hurry?" he asked. "Just going home," I replied, keeping my voice steady. He didn't like that. Not the answer, just the calm. The fact that I wasn't giving him anything to feed off of. And I could feel it then. This wasn't about a stoplight. This was about me. He studied me for a few more seconds, then stepped back and said, "Step out of the vehicle." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel for just a second. Not out of fear, just out of instinct. I turned to look at him. "Is there a reason for that, officer?" His lips twitched, like he was holding back a smirk. "I asked you to step out of the car. You don't want to make this harder than it has to be." It wasn't a request, and it wasn't a threat either, at least not out loud. But I knew what it was. I exhaled slowly, then opened the door and stepped out. He gave me the once-over, his eyes scanning me from head to toe. I'm a pretty tall guy, and I've got broad shoulders, been told I look like I used to play ball. But I was wearing a clean, tailored suit. Nothing flashy, just professional. My shoes were polished. My shirt still tucked in. Nothing about me screamed, problem. But that didn't matter. "Hands where I can see them," he said, motioning toward the front of the car. I nodded and walked around to the hood, keeping my movements slow, controlled. Calm. He came up behind me. I could hear the crunch of his boots on the pavement as he approached. Then the pat-down started. It wasn't just a search. It was aggressive, quick, but with that extra pressure on each pass. His hands lingered in places longer than they needed to. He wasn't looking for weapons. He was looking for a reaction. But I didn't flinch. Didn't move. Didn't give him the satisfaction. After a few moments, he stepped back. "You're clean," he muttered. And he didn't sound relieved, he sounded disappointed. Like he was hoping I'd be carrying something that would make all this worth it. I turned and looked at him. My voice stayed level. "Of course I am." He narrowed his eyes. "I'm not done," he snapped. "You seem to know a lot about what I can and can't do. Care to explain why?" I folded my arms casually, not confrontational, just comfortable. "I've had a few run-ins with law enforcement over the years," I said. "You learn a thing or two." His jaw clenched. "So what are you, a lawyer or something?" I smiled, just a little. "Or something." That clearly pissed him off. He stepped in again, closing the space between us. "Listen," he said, voice low now. "You think you're smarter than me? Think you can talk your way out of this?" I held his gaze. "I don't think anything. I just believe in fairness. And what I'm seeing here doesn't feel like that." The words hit harder than I expected. He opened his mouth, and then caught himself. "Fairness," he repeated, almost laughing. "You think fairness has anything to do with this? People like you always." He stopped himself. But I heard it. Every word he didn't say. And I made sure he knew it. "People like me," I repeated, my voice softer now, but sharper too. He stepped back, like he knew he'd crossed a line. "You know what I meant." "I do," I said. "And I think you do too." He didn't say anything after that. Just stood there, jaw tight, like he wasn't sure whether to push this further or back off. I watched him. Not angry, just tired. Tired of how familiar this whole thing felt. He looked away for a second, then back at me, like he was trying to find a reason to keep this going. I could see it in his eyes. He was scrambling now, searching for something to pin on me that would justify the way he was acting. And then he said it. "Turn around and put your hands on the hood. I need to check for weapons." I raised an eyebrow. "Weapons?" I repeated, not yelling, not sarcastic, just surprised. "Do I look like I'm carrying a weapon?" His jaw flexed again. That crack in his confidence was starting to show. "I'm not gonna ask again," he said. Firmer this time, like he was trying to convince himself more than me. I paused for a second. There was this flicker, something unreadable, running through my mind. And then I turned and placed both hands flat on the hood. He walked up again. Didn't say a word this time. Just stood behind me. The silence between us stretched out. Felt heavy. Then I broke it. "Officer," I said, calm as ever. "I think it's time you knew who I am." He didn't respond right away. Just kind of scoffed under his breath. "I don't care who you are," he said, though his voice cracked a little when he said it. I slowly reached into my jacket, slow enough that he wouldn't flinch. "I'm reaching for my badge," I said. Clear. Calm. No sudden moves. No surprises. "Just want to show you something." His hand twitched near his holster, but he didn't stop me. I pulled out my wallet and flipped it open. Inside was a gold badge. Clean. Official. "Marcus Walker," I said, turning to face him fully. "Internal Affairs. Houston Division." Everything stopped. He looked down at the badge, then up at my face, and back again, like he was hoping it was fake. But it wasn't. And I didn't blink. "Internal Affairs," he repeated, but his voice sounded smaller now. "Yes," I said, cutting him off before he could spiral. "And I oversee officer conduct. You know, the kind of thing where we make sure people like you wear that badge the right way." He went pale. Not dramatically, but you could see it in the way he stepped back. His hand dropped from his belt like it had suddenly gotten too heavy to hold. I stepped forward just slightly, slow, steady, nothing threatening. Just enough to close the space. Do you know what the most troubling part of this whole thing is? I asked. He didn't answer. Just stared at me like he realized he'd walked straight into something he couldn't walk back out of. It's not the profiling, I said. Though that's bad enough. It's not even the way you escalated a simple stop into something else entirely. I looked him dead in the eye. It's the fact that you did all of this, and had no idea who you were talking to. He looked like he wanted to say something, anything, but nothing came out. You assumed I didn't know my rights. That I didn't know the laws you're sworn to uphold. And why? I waited. He said nothing. Because I didn't fit your idea of someone worth respecting, I finished for him. Not loud. Not angry. Just honest. And that? I said. That's not just a problem for me. That's a problem for everyone you deal with in that uniform. Officer Mitchell didn't say a word. His shoulders slumped just slightly, just enough to tell me the weight of what I'd said had finally landed. He glanced down at the badge again, like if he stared long enough it might disappear. Like maybe none of this was actually happening. I stepped back a bit, giving him some space to collect himself. But I didn't let up. My voice stayed sharp. Here's what's going to happen, I told him. You're going to take a step back, hand me my documents, and you're going to think very carefully about what you say next. His lips parted like he wanted to respond, but he didn't. He hesitated. You could see it in his face, he was weighing whether he should push back or just shut up and do what I said. That pause cost him. So I added, just a little quieter this time, you're going to hear from me again. But not as the guy you pulled over. You're going to hear from me as the man who decides whether or not you're still fit to wear that badge. He swallowed hard. His face turned red, part shame, part anger, part confusion, and I could feel it sinking in. Slowly, he reached into his chest pocket and pulled out my license and registration. His hands trembled slightly as he handed them over. I didn't say anything. I took them, tucked them back into my wallet, and walked to the driver's side door. I paused with one hand on the handle, turned back toward him, and locked eyes with him one more time. Remember this, Officer Mitchell, I said. The badge doesn't make you better than anyone. It makes you accountable to everyone. Then I got in, started the engine, and pulled away, leaving him standing there in the fading light, silent, uncertain, and visibly shaken. But for me, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I drove home in complete silence. No music. No phone calls. Just the low hum of the road under my tires and my mind turning over every second of that stop. Not because it was unique. But because it wasn't. Officer Mitchell wasn't the first I'd encountered like that. And I knew he wouldn't be the last. But this time, I had the authority to do something about it. The next morning, I was back at my desk at the Internal Affairs Division. Early sunlight poured through the blinds in narrow beams, streaking across the stack of files I hadn't yet touched. But my focus was on just one, the one sitting right in front of me. Officer Jake Mitchell. His file wasn't squeaky clean. Nothing glaring or explosive, but just enough to make you uncomfortable. Minor complaints. Notes about unprofessional conduct. A pattern of excessive stops. Situations that always seem to fall under misunderstandings or insufficient evidence to proceed. Things that, individually, looked like nothing. But when you stacked them together, they started to paint a picture. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers and staring at that file. Because here's the thing, Mitchell wasn't a one-off. He wasn't some rare bad apple. He was a symptom. A reflection of something deeper, something more dangerous. And I was done pretending like this could be fixed with a slap on the wrist. There was a knock at my door. Tanya, my assistant, stepped in holding a thick stack of reports in her arms. "Morning, Mr. Walker," she said. "I've got the misconduct summaries for last month. Also, Chief Morgan asked me to remind you about next week's department review." I nodded and took the files from her. "Thanks, Tanya. Can you also set up a meeting with the chief this afternoon? There's something I need to talk to him about." She hesitated, catching something in my voice. "Of course," she said quietly, then slipped back out. I looked back down at Mitchell's file, but my eyes weren't really focused on the words anymore. My thoughts were somewhere else. Because this wasn't just about him. Not anymore. This was about the system that allowed him to keep doing what he was doing without ever being checked. About the culture that let certain officers skate by, knowing no one was watching, or if someone was watching, they'd stay quiet. And I wasn't interested in staying quiet. Because culture doesn't grow from the bottom. It starts at the top. Later that afternoon, I sat across from Chief Morgan in one of the conference rooms. He was an old-school guy, gray in the beard, permanent crease between the eyebrows, the kind of man who'd seen more things than he probably cared to admit. He listened while I laid it all out, start to finish. I didn't hold anything back. When I finished, he let out a long breath and rubbed his temples. "This isn't the first time Mitchell's name has come up," he said finally. "We've handled some things internally. Quietly. And there it was." I looked him straight in the eye. "And that's the problem, Chief. Quiet doesn't fix anything. Quiet just lets it keep happening. It's time to be loud." He didn't respond right away. Just stared at me, the full weight of the moment settling between us. Finally, he asked, "What are you proposing?" I didn't hesitate. "A department-wide review," I said. "Not just of individual officers. I'm talking about training. Procedures. Accountability systems. All of it." The weeks that followed were chaos. Meetings. Interviews. Reports. Phone calls that ran too long. Conversations that felt like they never ended. I barely had time to sleep, let alone breathe. But I didn't care. I'd asked for this. I dug through records, compiled data, cross-checked complaints that had been ignored or quietly dismissed. I sat down with officers who'd seen things but never felt safe enough to speak up. And I didn't just stay inside department walls either. We opened the doors to the public. We hosted forums, let people speak freely, face to face with the people who were supposed to protect them. I listened to folks who'd lived through things way worse than what I experienced with Mitchell. Stories that never made it into reports. Stories that were too common to be dismissed as isolated. It was hard. It was raw. And it was long overdue. And through it all, Mitchell's name stayed on my desk. He was called into a formal internal hearing. I made no effort to hide that I was the one behind it. I sat across from him as he tried to explain away his actions. Tried to dress up his behavior with excuses and half-hearted justifications. He squirmed under the spotlight. You could tell he wasn't used to having to explain himself, to anyone. The hearing ended in a suspension. It wasn't permanent. And to some people, it might not have felt like enough. But to me, the real win wasn't in taking his badge away. It was in making sure the next Mitchell didn't get to operate unchecked. It was about changing what let him feel entitled to behave that way in the first place. Months passed. The review process rolled on. Things inside the department started to shift. Slowly, sure. But they shifted. Then one evening, I found myself standing at a podium in front of a crowd. It was a community event, officers in uniform, local leaders, city council members, residents from all over Houston. The room was full. Not just with people, but with history. With tension. With questions. I didn't talk about Mitchell that night. I didn't have to. I talked about something bigger. I talked about responsibility. Justice, I said, isn't just about catching the bad guys. It's about holding ourselves accountable. It's about making sure the people who wear this badge do it with integrity, fairness, and respect. That's the badge I believe in. And that's the one we're building, together. The applause that followed was loud, sure. But that's not what stayed with me. What stayed with me were the eyes in that room. Some skeptical. Some hopeful. All of them watching. And I knew, this wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of something better. After the event, I didn't stick around long. A few handshakes, a few polite smiles, a couple of thank yous, and then I slipped out the side door. I've never been one for the spotlight. Never needed a stage or a round of applause to know I did the right thing. The drive home that night felt almost identical to the one that started all this. Same quiet streets. Same orange haze in the sky. Same steady hum of my car beneath me. But I wasn't stuck in replay mode this time. I wasn't asking myself what just happened or how close did that get to going sideways. I was asking something heavier, what now? Because this thing, it doesn't end with a suspension or a speech. It doesn't wrap up in a neat bow just because one guy got called out. The real work begins after the cameras are off, after the policy memos are written, after the department meetings go quiet again. And that work? It's slow. It's messy. It fights back. I've been inside this system long enough to know exactly how good it is at protecting itself. It's like muscle memory. You push on a weak spot, and it tightens around it like it's trying to pretend it was never vulnerable to begin with. People love to throw around the bad apple line like it's a cure-all. But no one ever finishes the damn quote. The bad apple spoils the bunch. It's not just the apple. It's the tree. It's the soil. It's the hands that picked it and decided to put it in the basket anyway. And the part that really gets to me? Most of the folks in charge, the ones giving the speeches, the ones writing the statements about rebuilding trust, they don't even realize how deep the rot goes. Some of them aren't even malicious. They just don't know. Or worse, they don't want to. Because it's easier to stay blind when you benefit from the darkness. Now, I don't think Officer Mitchell woke up that morning thinking, I'm gonna screw with a guy in a suit today. I don't think he plotted it out. I don't think he saw me and instantly thought, let's ruin his night. What's worse is, I think he thought he was doing his job. Because that's what's been modeled for him. That's what he's been allowed to get away with. And if no one tells you you're crossing a line, eventually, you stop seeing the line at all. He's not unique. He's not rare. He's just one of many who've been quietly trained, through silence, through culture, through weak leadership, to believe that authority is the same thing as being untouchable. And that's the part one can't let go of. You can't teach accountability with slogans. You can't plaster a mission statement across the lobby and call it justice. You teach it through consequences. Through transparency. Through people willing to say, no. Not like that. Not anymore. That's why I didn't write Mitchell off. That's why I didn't take the quiet route. Because if we keep letting this stuff slide behind closed doors, if we keep letting it stay quiet, it's just gonna keep happening. So yeah, this story didn't end in a dramatic firing. There was no viral clip. No explosive headline. No heroic last-minute confession, no courtroom drama. It ended in a quiet room with a hearing, a thick stack of documentation, and a man forced to sit across from the person he tried to intimidate, and explain himself. It ended with a department being forced to look itself in the eye. And you know what? Even if that look only lasted a second. Sometimes a second is all it takes to see something you can't unsee. That's what I'm holding on to. Not hope, exactly. I've seen too much for naive hope. But maybe a spark. Maybe a shift. Maybe this time, someone higher up is paying attention. Maybe this time, a younger officer sees what happened and learns that it's not just okay to challenge a toxic culture, it's necessary. Maybe someone who looks like me gets pulled over tomorrow and doesn't have to prove they're worthy of basic respect. Maybe they won't have to reach for a badge just to be treated like a human being. That shouldn't be a luxury. That should be the baseline. But we're not there yet. Not even close. So no, there's no twist ending here. No grand resolution. No moral high ground. Still wearing the same badge. Still showing up. Still pushing against a system that doesn't always want to be pushed. Because I got pulled over. And the cop had no idea who I was. If this story hit you like it hit me, maybe it's time to start talking about it. These stories matter. And if you want more like this, stick around, we've got more coming.